Hi, my name is Mike Stearns. I'm lead technical instructor at Kofax, and I'd like to welcome you to our computer-based and on-demand training for Kofax Kapow version 10. Now, before we get started on the training, just a couple of things to orient you to the desktop that you're looking at. First of all, I want you to notice that there is a small Maximize button at the bottom right-hand corner. I would strongly suggest that you click on that now to maximize this presentation to your desktop. It'll make it much easier to read. And secondly, it also enables a full-time menu that shows up along the left side that'll allow you to navigate to certain points in the presentation. If you need to go back, you can do so. If you want to skip forward, you can do so as well. So do that now, and we'll continue on. I'd like to first of all overview the content of our course, and that includes duration, prerequisites, the materials you have in front of you, also the goals we're intending to accomplish, how the class has been structured, and the teaching methodology that's going to be used. And then I want to overview the 19 different training modules that make up our program. So if we were doing this in a live classroom situation, the training would take about 4 full days of training, and that includes a schedule that typically starts at 8:30 in the morning and ends at 4:30 in the afternoon. We typically also take a couple of breaks, a 15-minute break in the morning, one in the afternoon, and we also break an hour for lunch. Now that totals to 25 to 30 hours of training, and that's what you need to keep in mind because this training is self-paced. You're not on a rigid schedule. The 25 to 30 hours also allows for a couple of hours to take the certification exam, which is included with the course. And we'll talk more about that when we get to Module 19. All right, to get the most out of this class, there are certain things that you should have brought with you in terms of knowledge and experience. And let's talk a little bit about them here. And in fact, we'll talk about these in much more detail when we get to Module 4 later on in our class. Some coding experience is helpful. It's not absolutely necessary. We're really not going to do any coding here, but Kofax Kapow is a product that allows you to do some custom code. All right, to be able to read and interpret HTML, that's hypertext markup language, and JavaScript code. Also, some experience with XML, extensible markup language, and Java-related technologies like JSON and AJAX would also be helpful. Regular expressions. All right, I know many of you taking this training have had experience with regular expressions. They're used a little bit differently in Kofax Kapow. We have a concept of what we call patterns here. Patterns include regular expressions. So having some knowledge or experience in that area would be helpful. Also, there's a document that I strongly recommend that you read before you get into the second module of this training program, and that's the Kapow Software Training Preparation document, which we have included for you in your class resources. Now, your class resources you have either downloaded electronically, or we have provided a flash drive or perhaps a CD or DVD. But there is a documentation in the root folder called Kapow Software Training Preparation, and it's a PDF document. Bring it up, read it, and what's nice about it is if you find yourself a little light on certain areas that we recommend you have experience on, we do provide some hyperlinks for you in that document. So you can go out and participate in some online tutorials and boost your experience level a little bit. All right, now also in front of you, you should have a student guide for note-taking. Now, that will be a paper document. It's a spiral-bound book if you have ordered the hard copy of our training. If you opted for electronic delivery or perhaps delivery via CDs or DVDs, then they are going to be documents that are available again in the class resources, and you'll see a folder there called guidebooks, and there's a student guide and there's a lab guide. Now we invite you to print those out if you'd like to do so. All right, the student guide is a note-taking guide. It includes big thumbnails of each of the PowerPoints in our presentations, along with a space to the right side to allow you to record notes. They are not intended to be readable necessarily PowerPoints. They're too small for that. And to print these bigger would end up with a book that's this thick, so we didn't want to do that. We do, however, and you see that on the next major bullet, I guess it's the 1, 2, 3rd bullet down, that we do give you copies of all of the instructor slides. So if you want to review the slides, feel free to do so there. But anyway, the student guide is largely for note taking. We also give you a lab guide. Now the lab guide contains printed instructions for all of the hands-on exercises that you're going to be completing in training. For some students, the electronic version is fine if you don't mind switching back and forth on your desktop from one screen to the other. For others, they find it more helpful to have a printed out copy. So again, they're PDF, they're Microsoft Word doc format, but you're invited to print those out if you'd like to. As I mentioned a moment ago, copies of all instructor slides in PowerPoint format are included. And additionally, on your resource flash drive, you will find the Kofax Kapow installation software. And we include 2 of the 4 available versions of the full software package. Now you can also get various components if you wish. But we include the Windows 32 and 64-bit versions of the Kapow installation software. There are also 32 and 64-bit Linux versions, if you happen to be a Linux user. And there are components you can download separately from our e-fulfillment site if you wish. In addition to that, you're going to find an installer for a new feature, brand new feature in Kapow 10 called the Remote Device Agent. And it is an installer only available currently in Windows 32-bit versions that will allow you to enable a remote desktop to be controlled by a Kapow robot. Okay? And we also give you the documentation that's included on the installation media, and you get a limited Kapow license. It is limited by time, so check the date on that license. It's just a TXT file that's included in your class resources. If you see that date nearing expiration, you might want to contact us and request an updated license with a later expiration date, because we do time limit these things. Okay, so that's what you have in front of you. Now, the way we have structured this class is taking a building block approach. And what that means is we will start with simple tasks and concepts and then build upon them. For example, when we build our first Kapow robot, it is simply going to go to a website, open it up, and it is going to extract some information about a single item on that website, and that will be it. But by the time we get into our 2nd and 3rd days of training, well, we are going to be getting much more involved, and we'll be doing page loops and looping through items and reading from databases and writing to databases and so forth. So we start with simple tasks and concepts, and we will continually build upon them as time goes on in class, all the while reinforcing what you have already learned. Now we take a 3-prong approach to that. Number 1 is each module will begin with a PowerPoint presentation. So that allows us to get kind of a higher level overview of the tasks that we are going to be accomplishing why we need to do things the way that we do them, and so on. And then every PowerPoint, beginning with Module 2 and from that point forward through most of the class, will include a live demonstration. So that gives me an opportunity to take what you've seen in the PowerPoints and then dive into it a little deeper, and you can see all of the steps in context with one another as we complete tasks. And then finally, where the real learning takes place is when you get a chance to practice what you have seen and what you have heard with hands-on lab exercises. Okay? And that will begin with Module 3 when you actually install the product, and then we'll begin robot building pretty quickly after that. Okay, we should be able to measure the results of your training, and you can measure this for yourself. Number one, think about what you find easy to understand when you get to the labs, what might be challenging, and whatever is challenging to you, take some time, go back and review it. Secondly, the exam questions. Okay, this course includes a 50-question multiple choice exam that will allow you to measure, number one, your retention of what you have learned in class. Number two, and this is probably even more important, your ability to look up what you don't remember or perhaps what we didn't cover in this class. So our exams are by design open book tests, and they're designed that way to encourage you as a user of our products to use the resources that you have available and look things up that you either have forgotten or maybe haven't learned before. Okay, so that's how we'll measure how well the training is working for you. Now we have some goals that I want to outline for this course. Number one, we want you to be able to describe typical solutions for which Kofax Kapow software it is going to be appropriate, including use cases and also as a component of a larger Kofax solution. We want you to be able to describe and comprehend the software's basic components and architecture, including, and these words might be a little strange to you, but you'll get to know them as we go through class, including RoboServer, the Management Console, the Design Studio, robots, caplets, and also something called the Device Automation Agent. Sometimes this is called a desktop automation agent. All right, they mean the same thing, so we'll get into that later on. We want you to be able to install, license, and configure Kofax Kapow in a standalone configuration, and also be able to describe how to do the same in a live company network environment. Now, we're not going to be doing that as part of this class, but we will be talking about some of the options you have if you're installing in a production environment. We want you to be able to install this brand new feature in Kapow 10 called the Device Automation Agent on a second remote machine. Now, this might be a VM or virtual machine you have set up on your host machine, or it might be another machine completely. The key here, and we'll talk about this when we get to our modules on device automation, the key is that your machine running your RoboServer and Management Console needs to be able to communicate to the remote device and vice versa. That's critical to be able to complete the lab exercises. Okay, we want you to be able to access and use the online help and API documentation. You'll see there's quite a bit of documentation included in the product, and we'll be going through that and where it's located later on. We want you to be able to use Design Studio. That's where you build everything and test everything. Use Design Studio to configure and add attributes to what we call simple and complex data types. Okay, we'll be defining that later on. Create and test robots, both simple and more complex ones with branching. be able to set up database mappings, and also create and store what we call snippets. And we'll be actually, in the course of our class, learning how to create robots to import data from websites and web pages, create robots to import data from existing databases, also from Excel spreadsheets, by the way, and create robots to automate desktop tasks. Okay, we want you to be able to understand and describe what we call robot states. We want you to be able to set up data converters. And here's where we will get into patterns and regular expressions. Okay, to configure steps and identify valid and invalid steps. Set up what we call tag finders. It's how we find some of the data on our web pages and identify and correct errors. We want you to be able to configure device automation steps to automate tasks on remote computers. That's a cool new feature. Okay, create database tables. We want you to be able to use the management console to manage what we call clusters of robo servers, branch robot runs, access API, REST, and SOAP-based services, and also create caplets. Caplets you can think of as a little application that a user clicks on their desktop to actually run a robot. Okay, we'll talk more about that later. Use CapZone to run caplets, and also create them, by the way. To describe the functionality and protocols of the robo server and use of the robo server interfaces, and then finally pass a certification exam with a score of 80% or higher. So a lot of goals here for 4 days, huh? Yep, we're going to stretch you just a little bit. So let's take a look at the modules of this program that are going to accomplish those goals for you. First of all, we're in Module 1, which is just our introduction and overview of the class. And in Module 2, we'll take a look at Kapow the product and how it's used for robotic process automation. You'll learn a little bit about licensing as well, and some of the features that are new with Kapow version 10. All right, in Module 3, we'll go through installation prerequisites, software and hardware, and we will be installing Kapow. All right, in Module 4, we will review the prerequisites. Now, I touched on those a little bit a few minutes ago, but I have more information on what each of those terms mean if you're not familiar, and a little bit more on our training preparation guide as well. So we'll review some of those things and give you at least a high-level overview of each of the items that we list as a knowledge prerequisite. Okay, and then in Module 5, before we actually start building our first robot, we need to step through what we want to accomplish as a live human being, and that's going to give us a lot of guidance in what we want to accomplish in our robotic process automation. Okay, and we'll actually build our first robot. It's going to be a simple one, but it should work, okay? And in Module 6, you're going to get introduced to patterns and converters. Patterns, again, are made from regular expressions and can be useful in extracting certain pieces of data that you might be interested in with your Kapow robot. So we'll be taking a look at patterns. They're a little different than the regular expressions you might be used to in a product like Kofax transformation modules, for example. They're used a little bit differently here. All right, and then in Module 7, you'll get introduced to loops. So what's a loop? Well, this actually takes a look at a particular website that has many items listed on a page, and it allows the robot to loop through those items and return quite a bit of information about each item on the page. All right, well, there are many kinds of loops, and we'll look at several different kinds here in this training program. Uh, in Module 8, you'll be introduced to input variables. That is where a user typically interacts with a system, provides a value, and then the system will do something based upon that value. And we'll also be looking at more loops. All right, in Module 9, you'll get acquainted with the included Apache Derby development database that comes with Kapow, and we'll be writing data to it. And we'll also take a closer look at a component called the Management Console. Then in Module 10, we'll get back to loops again, and this is a more advanced loop called a repeat next loop. This one actually will allow you to loop through pages, multiple pages that might be returned. And we've all seen those pages on a website where down at the bottom it has page 1, 2, 3, 4, or it might have a next button, so we'll take a look at that. Okay, and we're getting into some more complex robots at this stage. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit. In Module 11, rather than retrieving data from a web page, we'll actually pull data in from an Excel spreadsheet and create a little robot that will write that data then to our development database. And we're going to be using that in Modules 12 and 13 for some new robots that'll do some cool kinds of things. So in Module 12, we'll take a look at creating a web service. In this case, it's going to be a REST, or a RESTful web service, that actually will connect to a post office website, and based on entering an address will return certain bits of information. And we're going to set that up to run as a service. And in Module 13, what we will be doing is using the database created back in Module 11 from our Excel spreadsheet, along with our RESTful web service, to return lists of information. In this case, it's going to be addresses, complete with latitude and longitude based on some search criteria we're going to set up. So this one gets pretty involved, okay? And you get through this one, you actually have learned quite a bit about Kapow. Now in Module 14, again, we are going to switch gears in and go in a different direction and introduce you to this cool new feature that exists in Kapow 10 called device automation. And what we will be doing is introducing you to that and having you install the device automation agent. It has its own installer, and this will be installed on another machine or VM that can communicate with the machine you have used up to this point in class. And once it's installed, we'll go through what's required there and a little bit about the installation itself and how it might vary from one operating system to another. Then we will be creating a new robot that includes a device automation step. Now that step is going to be one of the most involved steps you've ever seen, because it's almost like a robot within a robot. It's got its own user interface. And we'll be creating a device automation step that will eventually talk to the development database and pull data that you have created with an earlier robot and open up. In this case, it's going to be Microsoft WordPad, so you don't have to have any special software installed to do the labs. But we're going to be actually creating an RTF, a rich text format file, that includes a bunch of information that's pulled from our development database created by one of our web robots, and it'll create a WordPad document, and it'll automatically save it and close the application for you. So that's going to actually involve 4 modules: 14 to install the product, 15 we introduce you to device automation and have you create your first device automation step. In module 16, we will create a couple of more actually one more device automation step to populate the document. And in module 17, we'll be taking that robot that you've created now, and we will run it from the management console, set up a schedule, okay, so it will happen automatically, and also have you create a caplet so you could install that on a user's desktop. They double click the button and it runs the robot for them. All right. In 18, we will do a review and question and answer. Well, this is computer based and on demand training, so you don't have the opportunity to ask me questions directly. Of course, there's always email if there are insurmountable problems, but we will do a review and get you prepped for the test, which is module 19. So that's what our class is going to look like. Remember, on these presentations, folks, do click the maximize button. You'll get a much more readable screen. And with the PowerPoint presentations, you get a navigation menu as well. Now, on the lab exercises, there is no navigation menu because it's just a streaming presentation, if you will. Okay? But do use the maximize. There's a lot going on many of our screens. It'll be much easier to read for you. Okay, so go ahead and close down this presentation now. And I'd like you to go ahead and open up the presentation from the main menu for Module 2. I'll see you there.